Jacob Hayes and Maria Thompson were just starting their day like any other at Maple Creek Elementary, unaware that within minutes a man wielding a hammer would turn their quiet town into a scene of chaos, shattering the safety they had always taken for granted. The morning in Briarwood began like any other, calm and predictable in the way that small-town life usually was. The streets were lined with trees that had just started to shed their leaves, and the sidewalks were filled with families making their way toward Maple Creek Elementary. Mothers adjusted jackets on their children. Fathers carried coffee cups, and buses hissed to a stop as they opened their doors for waiting students. The air was cool but pleasant, filled with the hum of chatter and the occasional bark of a dog from one of the houses nearby. To anyone passing through, it was the kind of peaceful scene that gave the impression nothing dangerous could ever disturb it. But that illusion was about to break. On the corner opposite the schoolyard, a man appeared, walking slowly, but with a purpose that seemed oddly out of place. He wore a hood pulled low over his head and carried something in his hand that caught the light of the rising sun. It was a hammer, the kind used for heavy construction work. At first, no one noticed him. Parents were too focused on their children, and the teachers guiding students inside paid little attention to the stranger standing at the edge of the property. He blended in just enough to seem unimportant. But to those who happened to look a little longer, something about the way he held that hammer was unsettling. He wasn't swinging it casually or carrying it as though he were on his way to a job. Instead, his grip was tight, his arms stiff at his side, as if he were guarding it. Minutes passed, and the man began pacing back and forth along the sidewalk. His steps were slow, deliberate, and strangely rhythmic. A few older students waiting near the entrance spotted him first, whispering to each other as they pointed toward the fence. Some laughed nervously, thinking it might just be a worker from a nearby site, though there was no construction in the area. The laughter died down when the man stopped moving altogether and turned his head toward the playground. He didn't say anything. He didn't wave or gesture. He just stared. A mother buckling her child's backpack caught sight of him and froze. She didn't recognize the face beneath the shadow of the hood, and something instinctive told her this man didn't belong there. She hurried her child through the doors, her heart racing, though she couldn't quite explain why. Others began to notice as well. Some drivers waiting in their cars to drop off students shifted uncomfortably, peering through their windshields as if trying to convince themselves it wasn't as strange as it looked. The atmosphere around the school started to shift in ways that were hard to describe. The cheerful morning routine began to feel tense, as though a quiet alarm had gone off that only a few could hear. Children's voices, once carefree, seemed to fade under the weight of unease. Teachers at the entrance looked over their shoulders, their smiles faltering when their eyes landed on the stranger. One of them reached for a phone, hesitating before dialing, unsure if they were overreacting. The man's pacing grew sharper, his grip on the hammer tightened, and with each turn on the sidewalk, he edged closer to the school fence. The sound of metal scraping against his ring as he adjusted his hold gave away how heavily he clutched it. No one spoke to him, and he made no effort to speak to anyone else. He was just there, silent, menacing, and undeniably wrong. By the time the bell rang to signal the start of the day, nearly everyone who saw him knew that something about this morning was different. The town that prided itself on safety and normalcy had been touched by a shadow it wasn't ready to face. What had started as just another ordinary morning was now marked by the presence of a figure whose intentions no one could yet understand, but whose silence carried the weight of danger. The bell had barely finished ringing when children poured out onto the playground for morning recess. The air was still crisp, and the shrieks of laughter carried across the schoolyard as students raced toward swings, slides, and basketball hoops. For a moment, it seemed as if the earlier unease had faded into the background. Teachers watched from the sidelines, chatting quietly while keeping a protective eye on the children. The normal rhythm of school life was returning, but that sense of safety would not last long. It was a group of boys near the fence who first noticed him again. The same man from earlier, still clutching the hammer, had moved closer. Now, instead of pacing, he stood still, his eyes locked on the playground. The hammer glinted in his grip, and with no warning, he raised it high and brought it down against the metal bars of the fence. The sound rang out with a harsh clang, louder than any child's laughter. It echoed across the playground like a bell of alarm. The children froze, their games cut short as they turned toward the source of the noise. The man lifted the hammer again and struck the fence a second time, harder, sending a metallic shudder through the air. The teachers reacted instantly. Whistles blew, voices rose, and children were herded toward the building as quickly as possible. Confusion spread among the kids, many of them crying or calling for their parents. Some clung to each other, staring back at the figure who seemed to enjoy the chaos he had sparked. His face remained hidden under the hood, but his posture radiated an energy that was both threatening and unpredictable. He did not speak, did not shout, and did not cross the boundary. He only hammered again and again against the fence as though daring someone to stop him. On the street, drivers began to panic. Cars honked as parents scrambled out, some shouting for their children to get inside. A mother tried to push past the teachers to grab her son, while another parent blocked traffic as she threw open her car door in desperation. The scene quickly turned from confusion to outright disorder. The sound of the hammering was relentless, each blow like a reminder that the man was in control of the moment. A teacher inside the school rushed to lock the main doors while others herded students into classrooms. The noise of slamming locks, crying children, and shouted instructions filled the hallways. Inside, some kids crouched near windows, peeking out in terror, while others huddled under desks, their small bodies shaking with fear. The school, usually a safe haven, now felt like a fortress under siege. Meanwhile, outside, the man began stepping off the sidewalk and into the road. He walked slowly, dragging the hammer along the pavement so it scraped and sparked. Cars screeched as drivers swerved to avoid him, horns blaring in frantic bursts. The man stood in the middle of the street, hammer in hand, forcing traffic to stop in both directions. He didn't attack anyone, yet his presence was enough to paralyze the entire block. People watched from behind car windows, too afraid to move, as he raised the hammer once more and slammed it down on the hood of an empty parked vehicle. The alarm blared, mixing with the noise of traffic and frightened shouts, creating a chaotic symphony of panic. What had started as a peaceful morning recess had turned into a nightmare within minutes. The playground that once echoed with laughter was now deserted, the children hidden inside while adults scrambled in confusion. The man had taken control of the neighborhood with nothing more than silence, intimidation, and a hammer that seemed to strike fear with every blow. When the first police cruisers turned onto Maple Street, relief swept through the parents and teachers who had gathered in clusters near the school entrance. Flashing lights cut through the chaos, sirens wailed, and officers spilled out with hands on their weapons. For a moment, it seemed as though order was about to be restored, and the strange terror brought on by the hammer-wielding man would finally come to an end. But when the officers scanned the street, the sidewalks, and the playground fence where he had been only minutes earlier, he was gone. The man who had paralyzed an entire neighborhood had vanished as if the ground had swallowed him whole. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Witnesses pointed in different directions, each certain they had seen him run a particular way. Some insisted he had sprinted toward the woods behind the schoolyard, weaving between the trees where patrol cars could not follow. Others claimed they saw him slip into an abandoned house 2 blocks away, one that had been boarded up for years but was notorious among children as a place to avoid. Another parent swore he had disappeared into traffic, ducking between moving cars before sprinting down a side street. The accounts contradicted one another so completely that officers had no clear trail to follow. The search began immediately. Police fanned out through the neighborhood, combing the tree line, checking vacant houses, and questioning drivers. Helicopters circled overhead, shining down beams of light in case he was still lurking nearby. Officers even brought in dogs to track his scent, but the animals whined and pulled in circles, unable to pick up a clear path. It was as though the man had never been there at all. Inside the school, teachers did their best to calm the children. Classrooms had been locked, blinds pulled shut, and lights dimmed. Some students huddled together in corners, whispering about the hammer against the fence and the frightening figure who had looked at them without saying a word. For them, the fear didn't end just because the man was gone. Every creak in the hallway and every shadow at the window made them jump. The sense of safety that had defined their school was shattered, replaced by a deep unease that hung over every room. As hours passed without a sign of the suspect, rumors began to spread. Some whispered that he must have been someone from town, a neighbor hiding in plain sight. Others believed he was a stranger passing through, drifting from place to place with no connection to anyone. There were even those who insisted the police weren't but telling the full story, that the man had been caught, but his identity was too disturbing to reveal. None of it was true, but the absence of answers made speculation grow wilder with every passing hour. When the official search ended at dusk, no hammer was found, no footprints were discovered, and no suspect was identified. Officers returned to the school only to tell parents and teachers the same chilling fact. The man had slipped away without leaving a trace. The threat was gone, but the uncertainty remained, and in many ways that was far more frightening. The figure with the hammer could return at any time, and no one in Briarwood would be prepared for where he might appear next. 2 days passed in Briarwood, and the tension that had gripped the town showed no sign of easing. Parents kept their children close, walking them to school instead of letting them take the bus, while teachers double-checked locks and monitored every corner of the playground. The hammer-wielding man had disappeared, but his presence lingered like a shadow over every familiar street and house. People spoke in hushed tones, replaying what they had seen, trying to piece together how someone could strike such fear and vanish without leaving a single clue. It was during routine maintenance on the school grounds that the next discovery was made. A groundskeeper had been clearing debris behind a storage shed near the edge of the property when something caught his eye. Partially hidden beneath a pile of old leaves was an object that seemed oddly out of place. Curiosity turned into unease as he reached down and unearthed it. It was a hammer, the handle worn and wrapped in layers of black electrical tape, its head dull but heavy. The man's tool, left behind in a place no one had thought to check, carried with it the silent threat of what had already occurred. At first, no one knew what to make of it. The hammer could have been left accidentally, a relic from a construction crew, or an abandoned tool from a passing handyman. But when the police were called, a closer inspection revealed something far more alarming. The metal of the hammerhead was not clean. Streaks of dark residue ran along its surface. Lab technicians tested the substance, and the results were shocking. What had been assumed to be paint was, in fact, dried blood. Suddenly, the incident near the school shifted from a case of trespassing and public disturbance to something far more sinister. Investigators combed the immediate area for additional evidence. There were no fingerprints, no discarded clothing, no trace of the man himself. The only link to him now was the hammer, its head smeared with blood that suggested prior violence. The discovery raised disturbing questions. Had someone been injured before appearing at the school? Was this a man who carried a pattern of aggression wherever he went? The quiet neighborhood that had seemed safe now felt fragile, like the surface of a calm lake hiding violent currents beneath. Parents and staff were shaken when the news spread. For many, it became impossible to separate the hammer from the potential danger it represented. The school held emergency meetings, reviewed security footage, and brought in additional officers. But none of these measures could undo the terror that had already been sown. The thought that the man might have caused harm somewhere else before arriving in Briarwood made the threat feel larger and more unpredictable. In the days that followed, Police tried to connect this hammer to prior crimes, reviewing past assault reports and unsolved cases in neighboring towns. It became clear that the weapon might not just be a tool of intimidation, but a key piece of evidence linking the man to a history of violence. The realization unsettled everyone. The hammer had not only been left behind, it had been a silent witness to a story far darker than anyone in Briarwood had imagined. The small town had been touched by a presence that was mobile, unpredictable, and capable of leaving terror in multiple places, and no one could say when or where he might appear next. As investigators delved deeper into the evidence surrounding the hammer, a chilling connection began to emerge. The dried blood on the handle was analyzed and matched to an unsolved assault from several months earlier in a nearby town. In that case, a man walking home late at night had been struck repeatedly but survived, though the identity of the attacker had never been discovered. The similarities were striking. The method, the aggression, and the apparent randomness of the attack all mirrored the behavior displayed at Maple Creek Elementary. The hammer-wielding man had not acted out of whimsy. He was part of a pattern, a figure moving from place to place, leaving chaos and fear in his wake. The realization sent shockwaves through Briarwood. Residents were forced to confront the unsettling truth that the man who had terrified their children was not just a local anomaly but a wandering threat. He had a history that no one could see, and the small community that had prided itself on safety and predictability suddenly felt exposed. Police broadened their search, reviewing footage from surrounding towns, questioning witnesses from other incidents, and attempting to track any similar encounters in the past year. The hammer, once an ordinary tool, had become a symbol of his mobility and menace, a tangible clue linking incidents that had seemed unrelated. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, the man himself remained elusive. Every lead ended in frustration. Supposed sightings dissolved into dead ends, abandoned houses revealed nothing, and tips from residents often contradicted one another. The more the investigation unfolded, the more it became clear that he had learned how to evade detection, slipping into crowds, vanishing into empty spaces, and leaving no trace behind. It was as if he had mastered the art of existing in the periphery, never quite fully seen, yet always capable of instilling fear with minimal action. In the community, life slowly resumed, but the shadow of the event lingered. Children were escorted to and from school under close supervision. Playgrounds were monitored constantly, and teachers remained on edge. Conversations among parents rarely strayed from the incident. Every unfamiliar figure was scrutinized, every unusual sound questioned. The man with the hammer had altered the rhythm of the town, leaving a psychological mark that no physical presence could fully erase. Even when normal routines returned, the memory of his silent, menacing pacing along the sidewalk persisted in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Authorities compiled a profile, piecing together behavioral patterns and previous incidents. They concluded that he was likely a transient individual, moving between towns with no fixed address, targeting areas where crowds gathered but where escape routes were plentiful. While his motives remained unclear, his actions were deliberate, calculated, and designed to terrorize rather than to directly engage. The discovery of the hammer, tied to a prior violent encounter, made it evident that he had acted before and would likely act again if given the opportunity. Briarwood would never see the man with certainty, yet he had already left a permanent mark on the town's collective memory, a reminder that danger can emerge anywhere without warning and vanish just as quickly, leaving fear in its wake.